The 1983 MCI 9A New Jersey Transit has a kneeling feature which, while useful for loading elderly passengers, can be troublesome in a bus conversion, possibly stranding you. Many people choose to disable the kneeling function to eliminate that risk. But first, a brief word about the MC9 Air suspension system. In the earlier versions of the MC9, there were 2 air beams per steer and drive axle. This schematic shows the front wheel housing kneeling system, and the air beams are shown in pink. They probably should be shown in orange because they frequently rust. There are 4 airbags per steer and drive axle, and 2 airbags for the tag axle, although the tags really aren't mounted on axles but a pivot arm that needs to be lubricated regularly. Each pair of airbags on the steer and drive axles share one of the 4 air beams. These air beams are simply frame structures that serve as air reservoirs to increase the volume of air available to support the airbags and increase the comfort of ride for the double donut style of airbags. The height is controlled by 3 height leveler valves which sense the difference between axle and chassis height and supply or exhaust air to the appropriate air beams and bags accordingly. There is a leveling valve on each side of the drive axle, but only one in the center of the front axle, which is shared by both sides of the steer axle air beams and bags. The leveling valves have a built-in delay mechanism, which can be short or long, which allows it to adjust to sustained height changes, such as those from carrying an increased load of passengers, but does not bleed excessive air for each bump in the road. The air beam and bag air supply comes from the auxiliary air system. You will want to check out the maintenance manual, master air schematic, to see how the auxiliary air system is supplied. The auxiliary system is behind a pressure protection valve of approximately 60 psi, which is why when you start up the bus, the air gauge pauses at 60 psi while it fills the auxiliary system before going on to pop off at 120 psi main system pressure, which is used for important things like braking. What follows is my best attempt to explain how the kneeling system on an MC9A bus works. I'm using the best schematic I have found of this system, but it is a bit difficult to read the handwritten explanatory notes. The normal air pressure for the airbags is regulated at 40 to 45 psi. If I understand correctly, the kneeling solenoid valves are downstream of the leveling valve delivery port and simply pass the air pressure to the air beams and bags. In normal operation, the top coil of the solenoid valve of a kneeling bus is closed, which allows air from the auxiliary system to be regulated by the front leveler valve and inflate the front air beams and 4 airbags as shown by the green lines. When kneeling, the bottom coil of the solenoid valve closes and exhausts air from the front air beams and 4 front airbags as shown by the red lines. The kneeling function dumps the air down to 18 to 22 psi while kneeling, lowering the front of the bus, making it easier for passengers to make the first entrance step. During recovery from kneeling, the normally closed fast recovery valve or solenoid opens to allow air pressure from the wet tank to quickly fill the front air beams and 4 airbags as shown by the blue lines. It closes again once pressure in the front air beams and bags reaches 40 to 45 psi, which causes the bus to rise back to normal driving height. Apparently, the auxiliary system pressure was not considered sufficient for quickly raising the front of the bus after kneeling, so the MC9 kneeling system rapid recovery air source came directly from the higher pressure of the wet tank. Now we're back to normal ride height operating mode. Understanding how all this works, if we want to delete the kneeling system, we need to do some plumbing. To remove the kneeling system, we need to eliminate the valves and solenoids associated with the kneeling function, as well as the recovery air line coming from the wet tank. We want to remove and plug the recovery line connection to the wet tank, as we won't be needing to rapidly raise and lower the front of the bus anymore. Then we need to disconnect the delivery port of the front leveler valve from the kneeling valve assembly and reconnect the leveler valve to the T for the 2 lines going to the 2 air beams and 4 front airbags. While we're here, we need to also verify that the leveling valve supply is connected to the auxiliary system, not the wet or driver's side tank, because the wet tank is at a higher pressure and, in theory, may have more moisture than the auxiliary system. Then we can disconnect the solenoid control wires and remove the kneeling valve assembly, which is mounted on the back side of the same vertical mount as the leveling valve. The last step is to remove the line coming from the curb side of the air beam, or the front air beam, and going into the spare tire compartment. Don't forget to plug the remaining NPT threaded fitting in the front air beam. Note that this line is connected to the door switch, which may be important if you still have a functioning bifold door. I think this line also controls a kneeling buzzer, but that buzzer should not be necessary if your main low air pressure buzzer works. I'm not completely sure how these last circuits function, as it was disabled by the shop as soon as I purchased the vehicle. With the front leveling valve directly supplying the front air beams and bags, you should have no worries about the kneeling system disabling your bus from here on.